For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to The Gist on Stratnewsglobal. I'm Surya Gangadharan, and this evening we are going to focus on India's plans for a Desi space station in about 9 years' time, that is 2030. So, what would it involve? We have a small graphic here that I'd like to play out. Basically, it would involve technologies that India may not have at present. It would require India to collaborate with other nations that have more advanced programs. There are, of course, costs involved, and India may have to join one or the other space alliance. Now, note I'm saying India may have to join one or the other space alliance. So we now go to my guest, my expert, Chaitanya Giri. He's running a space consultancy in Pune called Dawon Advisory and Intelligence. He's also a consultant to the Ministry of External Affairs think tank called the RIS, Research and Information Systems for Non-Aligned Countries. So, Chaitanya, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you, Mr. Gandharvan.
Now, Parliament was informed the other day that India has plans for putting up a space station, I presume in low Earth orbit, around 2030. Chaitanya, is this very ambitious? What would it involve?
I will say it is opportune for India to aspire for a space station at this juncture when it is expecting to breach the $5 trillion GDP mark in this decade. The space reforms that were initiated in 2020, in the summer of 2020, have given the Indian industry a pedestal equal to the government space agency, which is ISRO, in the pursuit of space exploration. Now, when we talk about space exploration, we include both the robotic and the human spaceflight component. And lo and behold, space exploration or even human spaceflight is not a fanciful undertaking anymore. It has begun to achieve or have strong techno-economic connotations. We are in an era of government-sponsored, commercial, and civilian astronauts. In this decade, we'll also see the first commercial space stations coming up, and we are already seeing, private sector companies, especially those from the West, who are flamboyantly entering into the space logistics businesses, where they are providing their launchers, space launchers. They are carrying freight to the International Space Station. They're carrying astronauts. And many of these companies are also aspiring to take these two to the moon and Mars in the next 20, 30 years. So the domain is very pregnant with possibilities. We must also look here into Asia. China has already begun assembling, as you mentioned, a fairly internationalized space station. And even to the West, if you notice, UAE, which is considered as a very recent entrant into the space fraternity, it is also building emerging technologies like 3D printing to build habitats, human habitats for Moon and Mars. So, is it ambitious? I don't think so. It is very timely, is the word I'll use. Now, when you ask about what would it involve, I must put here for the better comprehension of our audience that the Indian Human Spaceflight Program, although it was named that way only recently, after 15th August 2018, the momentous speech that the Prime Minister gave from the Red Fort. But the first steps of the Human Spaceflight Program were taken back in 2007 when a certain experiment known as the Space Capsule Recovery Experiment was conducted. It was a dummy capsule which was sent up into high orbit, and it was brought down so as to test the prototype, whether it could endure the high temperatures and the high forces, G forces, while entering into the Earth's atmosphere. So we've done that. Then over the past 10 years or so, we've seen the GSLV Mark III, which is the human rated carrier of India. That was frequently tested. Hereafter, as we heard the Minister of Science and Technology and Minister of Department of Space, Dr. Jitendra Singh, when he mentioned we are just a couple of years away from the test and the space station. What will happen is, firstly, we'll do the necessary uncrewed missions in the next 2 years before the first human spaceflight goes on. Then, beyond that, there will be something known as the SPADEX. It is known as a space docking experiment, where two fairly large spacecrafts will be experimented in a way that they dock with each other, they join each other in the orbit. Because these sort of docking experiments are very necessary as we build a space station. And these are like they're Lego-like modules that need to be tested. And what ISRO has said is that we are intending to build a 20-ton space station, so 20,000 kilograms. This is much, much smaller than the International Space Station or even what the Chinese are planning. And
Yeah.
if I am to draw equivalents, it will be roughly of the dimensions of Soviet Union's Salyut and USS Skylab space station that flew almost 40-50 years ago. Uh, Maybe by 2014, in the next 20 years or so, after this space station comes up, we'll go for a larger structure. It could be modular in nature. It could be inflatable in nature, like a balloon. But one thing
Yeah.
is clear: many of them will be built from substantial participation of Indian industries and startups.
So I would presume we won't do this on our own. I presume some old friends like the Russians will get involved, perhaps even the French.
Yeah, it is quite evident that Russia will come to some assistance. Even now, we see our astronauts are being
Yeah.
trained at the Gagarin Space Flight Center near Moscow. They are training our astronauts. France was very upbeat in 2018 when we announced the human spaceflight program, and it immediately offered us assistance with space medicine. The city of Toulouse in southwest of France is considered one of the biggest hubs of space medicine in the world. And the proactive assistance from these two countries did not come out of nowhere. I mean, if I may take you back into history, the India, Russia, France triad on human spaceflight, it goes back to the intercosmos era, when the Soviet Unions had built a space station or a series of space stations, and they took both French and Indian cosmonauts to these stations. So that strong association between the three continues to this day, albeit now with Russia and not Soviet Union. And there is a tremendous scope for the three to partner with each other, even in future.
Now, we were talking a little earlier. You mentioned that the world is kind of moving into two, perhaps even more space blocks. One led by the US, another perhaps by China. In that sense, can you tell us something about that?
Okay, so the block which the US is leading, although it will never call it a block, but it is for us to understand.
Yeah.
Uh, it comes under something known as the Artemis Accords. So
Yeah.
this is an agreement which the US had tabled uh, early last year, and it invited like-minded countries who share their interests with the US, to come forward and start contributing with their technical, human, and monetary resources. Because even the US understands that if they have to aspire to go to the moon or Mars and have sustained presence out there, they'll need assistance of many countries. Because howsoever economically powerful or capable you are, you won't be able to sustain that sort of a venture. So that brought in countries like UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, United Arab Emirates, and Italy and Brazil. They've come together and they've joined the Artemis Accords. Likewise, the Chinese, what they've done, especially for the space station program, they've approached the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, which is based out of Vienna, and through Vienna, they are trying to attract um, many potential partners, which may not join Artemis, and they would want them to come on work on the Chinese space station. Uh, I mean, this has equivalents in the intercosmos program. So you have a superior player followed by a rung of junior players, each of them helping with each other, bartering technology resources, monetary resources, and going forward. Now, whether we'll join any of these two is something that I don't want to speculate, because even back during the intercosmos era, we had just sent a couple of astronauts to train and go in the Earth's orbit. We weren't technology providers of any sort to that program.
Yeah.
And now the timing of Artemis Accords is very interesting. It is beginning at a time when US is escalating its contest uh, in across various spheres with China. Now, neither would India want to antagonize its immediate neighbor. Neither would India want to antagonize US, which it
Yeah.
considers as a partner.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, in such a scenario, it is in India's interest to upkeep its strategic autonomy, not for any holier than thou ideals, but to develop as much capacities indigenously and then go for partnership.
Mhm.
Fortunately, countries like France, Germany, Russia, Israel, they haven't yet, uh, you know, uh, uh, expressed their allegiance to any of the two blocs.
Okay. Hmm.
So Russia, though, has plans for something known as the International Lunar Research Station with China. Uh,
Hmm.
Moscow would want to have some latitude to have partnerships with other countries and not overly depend on China.
Hmm.
And for us, since we've given a call for Atmanirbhar Bharat, because it is a great virtue, and we must remember that Atmanirbhar Bharat should continue even in this domain, and we must remember it before expressing our allegiance to any of the blocks. And our partnerships should be based on our strengths. And one important strength is that we can walk across geopolitical blocks quite
Hmm.
smoothly. We are friends with Iran, we are friends with Israel, we are friends with Russia, we are friends with
Yeah.
US. So this is something which comes only to India, and this is our strength. We must play
Hmm.
that. Uh,
Yeah. So you mentioned strengths. Looking apart from the geopolitical strengths that we bring, what about in terms of space technologies and space resources? Do we bring strengths there? Do we have strengths there?
I think we do. We do. See, firstly, one of the biggest strengths is that we build our space technologies very cost effectively. Although we haven't yet commercialized a lot of them, but now that the space reforms have kicked in, and then there is a ecosystem developing around the space agency, you will see a lot of transfer of tech from the space agency or the space labs, government run space labs, into the industry. And that will only grow, and the barter will only increase. So, like for instance, we've heard this with the defense program, the uh, our missile program. It has a humongous, uh, industrial contribution.
Yeah.
And what India offers, which no other country can right now, is the scalability, which is possible because of our large market and our large
Mhm.
industrial potential. So the cost effectiveness and scalability of manufacturing is something that will come to us uh, uh, very easily. So those are our strengths.
And things like the ability to launch satellites, and launch vehicles. Do we have all those strengths of ours?
I mean, we are capable. We are capable, but look for let's say over the last 2 years, 2020 and 2021, we haven't
Yeah.
launched more than four
Mm.
spacecrafts. Whereas you see, even in the midst of the pandemic, the Americans, the Chinese, the Europeans, they were continuously at it. So,
Yeah.
that also comes from the attitude. The West or the China or the People's Republic of China, they've always seen space as a strategic sector. We do
Mm.
deem space as a strategic department of our government, but we haven't afforded it the strategic value that it deserves. We've always seen it as a mechanism to attain our socio-economic goals. Okay,
Mhm.
that can be one of the outcomes out of the space program. But none of these countries are going out there to satiate their fantasies.
Yeah.
Like I said, it has geoeconomic connotations. They want to
Yeah.
earn revenue. Uh, uh, I mean, there are certain industry studies uh, which say that in the next 10 years, a revenue of around 40 to $45 billion will be generated out of uh, lunar exploration, commercial lunar exploration,
Mhm.
where companies will build landers, rovers, and private companies will launch them and get them operating on the surface of the moon. So, if such activities are going to generate revenue, uh, why are we not, looking
Yeah.
forward to that? We need to have a share, at least a 5 to 10% share in that entire,
Mhm. Yeah.
potential revenue
Yeah.
that we
Now,
foresee.
what about the armed forces? I know the Air Force has a space, command or something. And do you see a possibility of these also being integrated into the, whole space ecosystem environment?
Yeah, I see. When Gaganyaan was first announced, I had written in one of my op-eds and said that this will be the first ever uh, interministerial mission.
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, in Gaganyaan, you have a terrific contribution coming from CSIR labs, which
Yeah.
are part of Ministry of Science and Tech. Then you have a heavy presence of Ministry of Defense, because DRDO is one of the tech contractor, as well as your astronauts are coming from the Indian Air Force. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
then you have DGCA, the Civil Aviation Ministry, which will have to eventually look into the aspects of space traffic, because you would want, with frequent launches, uh, that factor will also kick in. So this is one of the first interministerial missions. So it's not an ISRO mission entirely.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that in the next few years, we will see greater participation of many other ministries, many other departments, including Ministry of Commerce, with the with lexicon like space commerce or space economy kicking in. There will
Mm-hmm.
be good enough discussions on that aspect of how to make it really productive and profit making for India. There is an immense scope for all that you are asking.
Mhm. So, last question: how would you rate the capacity and the competence, technological competence of our private industry when it comes to space?
See, we a lot of heritage technologies, especially those from defense and those from the existing space proven platforms. Like for instance, PSLV. PSLV has
Yeah.
a huge industry component that will come into play. Even today, I was seeing on social media, there are some experiments going on in the deserts of Rajasthan on unmanned ground vehicles.
Yes. Yes.
So unmanned
Yes.
ground vehicles being tested in the deserts for all-terrain
Yeah.
activities. So the first thing that came to my mind was, uh, can these companies build rovers that would fly on the surface of Moon or Mars? They can
Yeah.
easily do that. So we do have the competence. It is just that we have not put in concerted efforts in that
Mhm.
direction. The space reform will do that. You also mentioned about the Defense Space Agency. That will also have a multiplying effect, because today, for the first time in modern India's history, we have three space agencies. This is something which we tend to, not emphasize on. So ISRO becomes the civilian space agency. Your defense space agency under MOD becomes your military space agency, and then you have entities like InSpace and NSIL,
Mhm.
which are helping commercialize a lot of technologies. So
Mhm.
these three or these four entities will interact with each other, and they will nucleate an ecosystem around them, and this ecosystem, which until now was heavily dependent on ISRO because ISRO was the only contractor.
Yeah.
Uh, so for them, DSA will become a new contractor. For them,
Yeah.
NSIL will become a new contractor. So there is a multiplier effect kicking in, and we'll see the results or the outcomes coming primarily through Gaganyaan and the human spaceflight program.
And that you would expect what, next year or this year?
So Gaganyaan is what, 2023.
Mhm.
So the first human spaceflight. And space station, as we've discussed, in 2030. So you'll start
Yeah.
seeing the ripple effects over this decade.
Yeah. Fascinating. Chaitanya Giri, thanks very much for all that insight. And I expect we will take forward this conversation in the near future when things start looking up space words. Thanks very much. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for those of you who tuned in, thanks very much for your comments, observations, and questions. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, visit our website, and keep tracking us as we bring you more shows on technology, trade, and so many other issues. Thank you very much. Good night.